Welcome to an Echo Tales production, where ordinary places hold extraordinary secrets. And every story invites you to listen a little closer. Settle in, dim the lights if you'd like, and open your mind to the unexpected. Let's begin with tonight's tale.
Hello? Anybody in here? Hello?
Marcus Berry woke up disoriented. The very first sensation he felt was the cold. It pressed against his face, arms, and the back of his neck. It wasn't the chill from an open window, but rather the damp, stale cold of a place that had been shut away for years. Then came the distant smell of aged wood, dust, and mildew. He tried to move, but felt the tight grip of rope around his wrists. The rope had also been looped around his ankles through the slats of a chair. His wrists were bound behind him, with the rope pulled tight enough to bite into the skin. His arms had been drawn backward through the slats of a wooden chair, forcing his shoulders into an angle that sent a sharp ache through his chest each time he shifted. Marcus tried to speak, but only a muffled sound came out. The gag pressed against his mouth. It was dry fabric placed between his teeth. Panic rose fast, and he forced himself to breathe through his nose. His eyes adjusted slowly. The room around him was lit only by daylight, coming through the windows. Dust floated in the light, and the walls were unfinished. The floor beneath him was warped and stained. He didn't recognize his surroundings, and he couldn't recall how he'd gotten there. Marcus pulled against the rope again, harder this time. The cabin was one room, maybe two. Marcus couldn't tell yet. His head was cloudy, and every part of him hurt in the dull, chemical way that suggested whatever had been used to take him was only now wearing off. His wrists were bound behind the slats, and his ankles were lashed to the legs of the chair. Barefoot, he felt the cold floor seep through his bare feet, like it had a personal grudge. Marcus lifted his head. Through the window across from him, he could see a thick blanket of snow, not just flurries, but a deep, undisturbed accumulation. There were no tire tracks or footprints to indicate that anyone had come or gone recently. It was the kind of snow that took weeks to build and signified that no one had driven down whatever road brought him here in a long time. Marcus had no memory of a drive. In fact, he had no memory of much at all. He began to struggle against the rope as determination to get loose from the rope grips grew with each passing moment. His breathing quickened. It was the muffled panic of a man realizing the scale of his situation. We'll return shortly with Act 1. The rope knots were tight, but not professional. Whoever had tied them had been in a hurry or was an amateur. The bindings dug deep into his wrists, causing his breathing to become ragged. After several attempts, he stopped struggling. Instead, Marcus rocked the chair backward until it lifted slightly off the floor. The weight of his body caused the chair to slam onto the floor, sending pain shooting through his shoulders. One of the chair legs gave way. The rear leg cracked under the strain, and Marcus froze. Every muscle in his body tensed as he waited and listened. The crack of the chair leg echoed through the cabin, and Marcus wondered if someone had heard it and was coming. He waited, but all he could hear was the wind outside, the old cabin settling around him. As the chair splintered beneath him, Marcus worked his wrists against the rope, feeling the burn of rope on his skin and the slow give of fiber against fiber. He began loosening the rope around his wrists. Once his wrists were free, he tore the gag from his mouth and loosened his ankles. Then he pulled himself out of the chair and stood for a moment with his bare feet on the cold floorboards, breathing hard and listening. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice, and no sound at all, except for the wind outside and his own ragged breath. He walked over to the windows and looked out. The terrain seemed endlessly long, miles away from civilization. He stood at the window, wondering how long he had been in that cabin. None of it made any sense. The last thing he remembered was his apartment in the city, and his girlfriend Danny asking him to run an errand before the fight.
Babe, we're watching the fight tonight, right? Want to grab some beer?
Yeah, in fact, I'll head out now, try to beat the crowd.
Get the good stuff, not the stuff you got last time.
It was fine last time.
It was warm by the third round. Hey, if you're going to the place on 5th, can you grab me a pack of cigarettes too? I'm almost out.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks. Hurry back. The fight starts at 9.
Marcus's last clear memory was stepping out into the biting cold of the city, with the brisk air nipping at his cheeks. He made his way to the nearby convenience store on 5th Street. But after that, everything was blank. He shivered, feeling the cold seep into his bones, and he scanned the cabin for any clothes or socks to wrap his feet in. We'll return shortly with Act 2. The cabin was small. One main room with a stone fireplace, cold and empty, no wood stacked beside it. A kitchen alcove with bare counters. A single door at the back leading to what turned out to be a small bathroom, also empty. No other rooms, no other doors, no other people. He checked every corner, every shadow. He said it out loud once.
Hello? Hello?
His voice thin and strange in the silence, and nothing answered. He was alone. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. He found a closet near the front door with a few items hung inside. A flannel jacket, too big for him, and a pair of wool socks balled in the pocket. No shoes. He pulled the socks on, then the jacket, and stood for a moment at the front door, hand on the lock, working up the nerve. He turned the lock on the door and creaked it open. Wind rushed in as he stepped outside. The cold hit him like a wall. And the snow, deep and untouched, stretched in every direction. Trees, dense and dark, ringed the cabin on all sides. There was no road that he could see or any power lines. He took one step, 2, then 3. He made it perhaps 10 feet from the porch before hearing a gunshot. It was sharp, distant, and echoed off the tree line. A bark exploded from a tree just inches from his head. A second gunshot came even closer. Frantic, Marcus made footsteps in the snow and headed back into the cabin, slammed the door, and locked it. Marcus pressed his back against the door and stared at the room in front of him. Someone had shot at him from a distance. It was far enough that he hadn't seen a person, a shape, or even a muzzle flash. Just the crack of the rifle and the tree beside him, losing a chunk of bark the size of his fist. He didn't know who, and he didn't know why. He didn't know how they'd known. The instant he stepped off the porch, or when he would be there at all. He waited. He told himself he'd try again when it was dark, because darkness meant cover. Darkness meant whoever was out there couldn't see as well as they could in daylight. Meanwhile, he searched the kitchen while he waited. He found a flashlight in a drawer and batteries that still worked. He also found a box of matches beside the cold, empty fireplace where there was no firewood anywhere. Nothing stacked outside or stored in any closet, and there was no electricity. He flipped a switch out of habit, and nothing happened. At least there was running water. He drank from the kitchen tap until his stomach hurt from the cold of it. When full darkness came, he stood at the door for a long time before opening it. The door eased open slowly and carefully. Then he clicked on the flashlight. He stepped onto the porch. The flashlight beam cut a narrow cone into the dark, snow swallowing the light almost as fast as it left the bulb. Everything was still, quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. He took a step off the porch. There was a gunshot, then another. Both shots came close enough that the snow kicked up near his feet. He didn't wait to see how close the next one would land. He bolted back into the cabin and slammed the door a second time. Marcus slid down the back of the door to the floor. He sat there for a long time, day or night. It didn't matter. They could see him either way. That was the thought that finally settled in his mind. It didn't matter what time he tried to leave, or how carefully he moved. Someone, or something, knew the moment he stepped off the porch. Who would want to do this to him, and why? If they wanted him dead, why wouldn't they have done it already? His stomach began growling. He searched the kitchen again, more carefully this time. He found 2 tin cans of tuna and 1 can of beans, but there wasn't a can opener or any utensils of any kind. He sat with the cans in his lap for a long time, turning them over and looking for some way in that didn't exist. Then he set them aside. Eventually, he slept, sitting upright in the broken remains of the chair. We'll return shortly with Act 3. He woke early the next morning, stiff and starving, and went to the window. There were no drapes or curtains covering the windows, just bare glass and the white expanse of snow beyond them. And for a long while, he simply stood, watching for movement, a shape between the trees or a glint of metal. But there was nothing. Maybe they left, he thought. Maybe whoever was out there had only meant to scare him. Maybe the woods were finally, actually empty. He thought about Danny, about her anxiety and the likelihood of her frantically calling everyone they knew asking about his whereabouts. He imagined there were search parties and police reports of his disappearance, and her voice hoarse from crying. He held on to that thought because it served as his sole source of motivation to escape. He unlocked the door and stepped outside. He took a tentative step, then another. It was eerily quiet, and nothing happened. He took a third step and scanned the tree line. Then he took a fourth step, and a single gunshot echoed through the air. He was hit just below the left shoulder and cried out. The pain arrived a half second behind the impact, and he was running before he fully understood that he'd been hit. The flannel jacket was wet and soaked where he'd been hit, leaving a dark red trail in the snow behind him. He locked the door to the cabin and checked the windows to make sure they were locked. The cabin had exactly one way out, and it was being watched constantly by someone who never seemed to sleep or eat or rest. He searched for a first aid kit, but there was nothing but the jacket already on his back. He pulled it off, wincing, and wrapped it tight around the wound, biting down against the pain until his vision swam. His breathing was shallow now and edged with pain. The wind outside picked up. He sat against the wall for a long time, holding the wound, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. Whoever was out there could see him, no matter the hour, could locate him from a distance most hunters couldn't manage in daylight, let alone the dark. Someone out there in the remote stretch of nowhere had access to this cabin and had the patience to simply wait. This wasn't random. Marcus broke apart the chair by slamming it repeatedly against the floorboards. By the time it was pitch dark again, Marcus had a plan. It wasn't a good plan, but it was the only one he had left. He gathered the broken pieces of the chair into a pile. He unlocked the door and cracked it open just an inch. Then he got on his stomach. And, ignoring the agony in his left shoulder, he pushed pieces of the wood onto the porch, arranging them as best he could in the dark. He took out a match and struck it against the floorboards to light the wood. Then he pushed the door shut and watched through the windows as the small fire caught, grew, and threw orange light against the snow. It was a distraction, something to draw the eyes in the woods toward the fire instead of the door. It was the only chance he had. He waited until the flames were high enough to throw real light across the clearing. This was his last chance to escape. He opened the door and made it past the fire. He was a desperate man running on everything he had left. He ran past the porch steps as fast as he could. But he didn't make it further than that. More shots echoed through the trees with rapid precision. Then there was silence. The small fire on the porch continued to crackle in the wind as the night went on. Marcus Berry fell into the snow and remained there all night. In the morning, the snow around him had gone a deep, dark red, already freezing at the edges. The fire on the porch had burned itself out hours ago. The woods were silent again. It was the peculiar silence of a job finished. No one came for Marcus. In fact, no one came at all. Six months had passed since the official search for Marcus's body yielded no results. In a small cafe situated 300 miles away from the cabin, Danny sat across from a man with kind eyes and a warm smile. The cafe ambience was cozy. The intimate table and the absence of words between them spoke volumes. Their hands intertwined as their fingers laced together. She smiled at him the way she used to smile at someone else, and he smiled back at her. It was the kind of exchange that conveyed a profound sense of fulfillment, as if there were no more uncertainties and no more waiting. This has been an Echo Tales production. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's story. Join us again for more intriguing tales from the shadows and the spaces in between. There are more mysteries waiting just beyond the quiet. Until next time, keep your eyes open.